Welcome into another edition of the Going Deep podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Masseri, here with Mike Bunt. We're going to be going over the draft, Mike's favorite UDFA talk, some free agent signings, some potential free agents, what the step chart looks like today, and some other topics. We look forward to getting into it, but we'll be right back with you.
Josh Allen, looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw, and it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action.
Well, we are back. We are back in action after a crazy Saturday with the panel, with myself and Mike. We went a whopping 6 hours live right here talking about one pick for the majority of the day until we got news of Nick Broker. So that was a very fun experience. We really appreciate everybody tuning in with us as we got it going on. But Mike, first and foremost, how are you feeling now that you've had 3 or 4 days of rest and some reflection, as well as being on the roundup?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good right now. I'm not going to lie. Saturday was quite the experience. 6 hours of football talk, live streaming. I got a little loopy towards the middle of that experience, but back at it last night with the Cover One Roundup guys, and excited to talk about this draft class and a couple of free agent signings. Big news today with the Bills bringing in a defensive tackle. So a lot to get to on the show tonight.
Yeah, looking forward to getting into it. Really, we did a good chance of recapping day 1 and day 2 live on the show. We had 6 hours, so we had a lot of different discussion points to talk about. So make sure if you want to see some real good footage, check out our day 3 coverage as we're kind of talking about a little bit of everything. But, now that we've had a kind of a few days, 72 hours to reflect on it, Mike, what are your initial kind of feelings now that you kind of put this thing all together with the draft class? How are you feeling? Better? Are you feeling worse? Are you feeling indifferent? Talk to me about where you left off after Saturday.
I feel good about this draft class. They addressed the most important thing to me, which was getting a pass catching weapon. Now, I was hoping for a receiver originally, a Zay Flowers or Jordan Addison, but I will not complain about Dalton Kincaid being the guy taking over that role. Brought in some size in Osiris Torrence, a guy that many people mocked as a first-round talent early in the process, getting him all the way at 59, which is incredible value. Obviously, we're going to talk about the third-round pick, Dorian Williams. There's some controversy among the fan base complaining about it, but we'll tell you how we feel about the pick, and then Justin Shorter to wrap up basically the offensive weapons, a guy with a lot of potential. So overall, I think there's a lot to be excited about this draft class, and we'll get into that. But there also is some concerns. A lot of people went in hoping for a right tackle. Some people wanted to get a starting middle linebacker. The Bills didn't address either of those in a way where they're going to get a starter. So there's going to be some debates back and forth, but a lot of intrigue overall.
Yeah, it was an intriguing draft class, one where, we spent a lot of time talking about Dalton Kincaid on the live show, what he's going to be able to do. Basically, your 11 and a half personnel in there. He's going to play different 11 sets. He might be in for 12. He's going to be able to most likely be a very versatile piece in this offense. And I believe he'll really be in line at Y at some point in his second year, maybe third year. Dawson Knox didn't have the world's most experience there. They're very similar body types and statures. So it's going to be interesting to see the trajectory of a Dalton Kincaid. I think it's one of those expectations thing again. Brandon Beane says he's not going to play Y. He also said that Dorian Williams is going to play middle linebacker. Backtracked a little bit on that one after he realized, okay, maybe I need to get a little bit different of an explanation, which I don't mind. I'm all for not creating expectations. I think that's the way to do it. But at the middle linebacker position specifically, that was probably one where he needed to at least say, like, yeah, we're going to entertain him there. We think he has the developmental skills to be there. He's got the wingspan, got the read and react ability. We think he can be a middle linebacker. He's not any smaller than any other middle linebacker, which is proven. He's just not Tremaine Edmonds. But he, for all intents and purposes, he's the same size as Roquan Smith. So there's really not a big deal there with height, weight, and speed and wingspan, hand size, all of it. So he can play middle linebacker. It's just, I don't think Beane wanted to tell you that and then be like, well, why isn't he day one starter? Why is AJ Klein in there? He didn't want to create this perception kind of like we felt with Bernard. So I think he's kind of managing expectations there with Dorian a little bit. But at some point I did like him to kind of tell us, like, there is a plan. It isn't just to back up Bernard and to back up Matt Milano. There is a plan at middle linebacker, and it's going to go to one of these guys. I wouldn't be shocked if one of them between Bernard is a starter and one of them's a backup, and then the other one is a day one position player in the defense. So that's my opinion on the 2 third-round picks. I think that if there's hiccups, you have Klein, you have Dodson there. I mean, both of them are special teamers that are veteran presence in the locker room that are there if there's any mishaps. But I do believe that they're erring on Terrell Bernard to start potentially. If not, and he's more of the backup, they are looking at Dorian Williams to be the starter, Mike. So I believe that's the plan. I don't know where they'll land in September, but that's, I think, the long-term plan over the next 6 months to get to where they need to be. So I'm feeling pretty good at linebacker. And if it totally all falls on its head, it's just the number one need next year. And there's a lot of veteran free agents that didn't get their 5th-year options picked up today. In other news, so as we've already spent a lot of time here on the first 3 rounds specifically, Nick Broker came in. We talked a little bit on the show about Shorter on Saturday. Boundary receiver, 4 down special teamer, can really do it all. 4-phase special teamer, can really do it all. So he's going to be an interesting, intriguing addition to this team. We kind of talked about it on the show. I talked about it elsewhere that the Bills really liked this guy. But Nick Broker comes in the mold of a Ryan Bates, played at Ole Miss. Really at one point was a day 1, day 2 tackle early on in his career, kind of showed that he was going to be a guard. And now, is more in that Ryan Bates mold of playing multiple versatile positions and is going to come in and compete. I don't think he's guaranteed a roster spot, but he's certainly going to make that interior that much better. So that's, was an intriguing addition where Beane claims that he was like the top guy on his board, and he wasn't even going to try to pick another offensive lineman, but that's how high he was ranked. And I kind of believe that based on where he was mocked earlier in the season. So that's lastly Alec Austin, another boundary type of cornerback who's going to be able to do it all. He's going to come in that Benford mold zone, read and react type of corner. So they did pretty well for themselves in this draft, Mike. So after you're looking at day 3, there's going to be some nice depth pieces added.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest guy day 3 is obviously Justin Shorter. What I've said on the show on Saturday, and I said it again on Cover 1 Roundup last night, I think he's going to be a fan favorite pretty early on, just because you look at him, he looks like a beast. The picture that was all over social media, completely ripped. You're talking 6'4", has the height, vertical threat down the field, has good hands on those contested passes. But we have to remember, he is a 5th rounder for a reason. He did not have the most productive college career. Now, some of that might be circumstance where he was playing, some of the systems that he was part of. But he's going to be a guy that we're probably going to see some flashes from in training camp in the preseason. And we have to remember, just like we got a little too far ahead of ourselves with Isaiah Hodgins at times, that there are other guys ahead of him and that the Bills like to be patient with some of their younger players. Now, that doesn't mean he can't see the field and that he can't earn time, but I do think the Bills view him more as a developmental player that could be someone that steps up in future years. And then when it comes to the seventh round pick and then the 6th round pick, Broker and Austin, we'll see if they have a chance to make the team. Obviously, Broker, the big stat everybody was talking about him was that he didn't allow a sack last year at Ole Miss. That can be a little bit misleading with the type of offense that Ole Miss was running. A lot of RPOs, quick passing. So we'll see what he can end up being. I know Air Raid thought of him as one of their under-the-radar prospects to look out for on day 3. So we'll see if he can at least be some competition in camp and earn a practice squad role. And then obviously with Austin coming out of Oregon State, late 7th round pick. The Bills have had some success on day 3 with DBs overall. So whatever McDermott sees in him, we'll see if there's a little bit more to develop and mold, because we're talking Dane Jackson. There's been Christian Benford, Levi Wallace, DeMar Hamlin. So these late round guys, you can't just automatically discount them when it comes to the Bills, because some of them find a way to end up making the roster and making an impact at times as well.
Yeah, and a good point for Shorter was the number 1 recruit out of high school, out of Jalen Waddle, and very talented players. So it's definitely, the talent's definitely there. He would tell you himself that he wished he put together a little bit more college production in his 2 stops. But the ripped images remind you of DK Metcalf. They kind of remind you of Josh Gordon, the player on the field. So you got that mindset, and he's definitely going to be a fan favorite. The team liked him. They selected him. They were convicted on him and his testing and what he's going to be able to do in his projection. So he's going to be a fun one. The difference, what protects him for being Isaiah Hodgins, is going to be the fact that he's a 4-phase special teamer. That's going to protect him on this roster. That's going to give him a jersey. That's going to get him in the game to show who he is, get your number, see him play on the field, and then get him some snaps at boundary. That wasn't the case with Hodgins.
And can I clarify, when I mentioned Isaiah Hodgins, I was more so referring to a fan favorite late round receiver that we need to be patient with. I'm not saying his game is the same as Hodgins. And yes, Isaiah Hodgins ended up doing well last year with the New York Giants. But we have to remember, it was already his, 3rd year in the NFL. It took 3 years to get to that point. What I'm saying is, with a guy like Justin Shorter, we're going to see a lot of flashes. We're going to see the athleticism, the body, the frame, the catch radius, and all that stuff. That doesn't mean day 1 he's going to be an impact player on this team. The same way last year, all of us, Kevin, myself, liked what Khalil Shakir brought to the table, but we didn't think Khalil Shakir was going to be part of the Bills' rotational receivers in September, October, in making big plays. Now, that's all I'm really preaching about with Isaiah. Just have some patience, because I think there is talent to work with Justin Shorter.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think to the counterpoint is the Bills took it a step further, obviously took him around earlier like they did with Shakir. And, obviously Gabe Davis was a couple rounds earlier than Hodgins, but the biggest difference there is his ability to get a jersey. They want him to get a jersey. They want to make sure his spot is secure for 4 years. The way to do that is to make sure he could do other things and just play boundary receiver. That's all that Hodgins could do in the red zone. He didn't present enough to get a jersey on game day. And that's really important to a really talented team. And the Giants may have just drafted over him anyways, for as much as we're talking about Hodgins. They certainly weren't shy about improving that room. Paris Campbell comes in for the slot, Jalen Hyatt on the boundary to take his job. So they obviously traded for Wandale. They still drafted, last year, Wandale Robinson. Re-signed Darius Slayton. So it's not all, rainbows and butterflies there for Hodgins. If he might be toward the last end of the roster again this year. So we're going to see how that develops, but the Paris Campbell in the slot and Jalen Hyatt there is going to be an interesting transition for him. So, but you got to be able to do those other things, and someone like Shorter can do them. And that's really what makes him different to me. And really, I think there's an entrenched 6 receivers on the roster right now. I think it's a really talented group. Could they use a high end wide receiver too? Sure. But outside of that, I think that the group of 6 is fairly good between, you got a good battle between Hardy and Shakir. You got Shorter actually as a real boundary option compared to last year. Just kind of guessing was really just Hodgins and nothing. You got another special teamer and Sherfield. Obviously you have your 2 starters in Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs, but it's a really good unit. And that's not even factoring in Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, who are going to come in and present different options and abilities, as well as our running back room with Nyheim Hines, James Cook. Now you got Latavius Murray just signed yesterday, another good signing there to help. You really 1-2 there with Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. You're 1-2 kind of at that versatile receiving back, speed back in James Cook and Nyheim Hines. So you're pretty deep all across the board on the offense. And the offensive line, maybe beside right tackle, everywhere else is really deep on the offensive side of the ball. Like I said, maybe a high-end right tackle, maybe a high-end second receiver. Other than that, the offense is in pretty good shape, healthy. And that's what you like to see coming into this is, the time and the effort they put to protect Josh give him some more weapons. And they did just that. They had a luxury pick in Osiris Torrence, a guy that, Beane says is going to help day one in the pass protection area. Didn't allow a sack. He can anchor. He's really good in the run too. I mean, he's just a stud right guard. And to push Bates really to that 6 role. You have David Edwards as the 7th role. You have Quesenberry as the 8. You have Tommy Doyle as the 3rd blocking tight end, and a versatile piece there. We had Tommy on the show. He said he'll play anything. So there's a lot of talent. You have Nick Broker fighting for a role. It's a fairly talented group, Mike, and one that is a lot better than last year. There's no question about it. The offense looks to be in really great shape, even without the premier receiver 2 addition. But Kincaid comes in and eases some of that tension. So we're looking good on the offensive side of the ball. It is, quite frankly, a Super Bowl caliber room that if something had to happen in, I don't think Beane will be shy to add to it if he needs to in September, if there is a reason to. So love the way that the offense has turned out. And one of the bigger question marks as we turn our attention to defense here, Mike, is the addition today of Poona Ford. They came in, they got it done. $10 million evaluation, critiqued a little bit on that spot track, but made 6.5 last year. It's not like he made 1.4 last year. It's not that far off of what he got paid. Is he more of probably a $5 to $7 million player? Yeah. Will he probably see more like 3 to 4 with some void years? Yeah. So a really good addition at the 1 tack. He can play a little bit of everything, rushes the passer really well, over 40 hurries over the last 2 years. Is a force in there. Could have been utilized heavily last year with the depth problems they had at the defensive tackle that really bit him by the playoffs. So he's a really big addition to the unit that they didn't add to because the board didn't fall a certain way. So right there is a pretty good five-man team that's going to be effective. You got someone who does everything else. You got Tim Settle. You have obviously Ed Oliver. You have Daquan Jones. You have Poona Ford. So it's going to be, Jordan Phillips. It's going to be a pretty good unit. I'll still sign to 1 year, Mike, but that is a really good interior defensive line going into the year.
Yeah, you got to love the addition of Poona Ford to this defensive line. Greg Thompson is in heaven right now. He's been calling that for a couple months, saying that he wanted Brandon Beane to target Ford and add him to the defensive line. And now when you look at this unit, had they not brought him in, had they just gone the draft, not gotten defensive tackle, there would have been some questions. Not tremendously huge questions, but there would have been a few questions about D tackle. Why did you avoid addressing that on the first 3 days of the draft? But now you bring him in, you add more depth, and you're looking at a unit that should be pretty strong up front. You're looking at guys like Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Jordan Phillips, and then Tim Settle. Obviously, you hope he steps it up a little bit from what he did last year because it didn't really add too much value on the defensive line. But this was a move that most likely had to wait till today because of comp reasons. Kev, I know that you've been up on all that stuff all off season, but it made so much sense. And obviously right after the draft, Brandon Beane was saying, we have a couple things we're working on. Mentioned defensive tackles, still some thought that they could be adding a defensive end as well. So I know that's something that we'll address, who could be some of the guys that they're looking at right now. But things are really starting to come together on both sides of the ball. You mentioned the offense. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But really outside of middle linebacker with the unknowns of who's going to step up in the competition and maybe defensive end at this moment, you're looking at a defense that pretty much is in a solid position as far as who their starters are, who their depth pieces are. We just kind of have to figure out middle linebacker and then one more defensive end on this squad.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the current Mike Clay team ranking units I had here. I think it's very interesting. This was obviously before the Poona Ford edition, but as you can see here, obviously quarterback ranks very high, running back, still middle of the road, low average. Still, they still consider our receiver room not the greatest. Tight end obviously took a huge bump with the addition there. O-line, they still have ranked pretty low, but if you take a look at the unit grades on defense, they're in great shape defensively. Second ranked defense before Poona Ford. That's before we go out and add an edge rusher that's seemingly on the fold. They haven't talked about edge yet, but looks like they may be entertaining like a Justin Houston, Melvin Ingram, Yannick Ngakoue. It seems likely that they make a move at that position to kind of cap off this roster as they go into training camp as the kind of the last move there. But it's pretty cool to see this, that the defense is still ranked 2. I know it's much maligned and we much talk about it, but the addition of Poona Ford, the addition of an edge rusher, Dorian Williams, they're in pretty good shape defensively, much more than I think we all kind of sit back and think about. So Mike, what's kind of your reactions off of the post-draft unit rankings here from Mike Clay?
Yeah, so I think the defense looks unbelievable once again. And that was kind of my thought, that a lot of people were going to be hard on the defense following what happened against Cincinnati, but that they were going to be strong once again next season, with or without Leslie Frazier. And you look at it, the 3.0s on interior, edge, and upgrading at the same time still at those positions. The linebacker score 1.9. Obviously, that's a little bit lower because of the uncertainty next to Matt Milano. But the corner score 3.0, that might be a little bit higher than what I expected. I know Trey is a great player, but there's a little bit of an unknown with what version of him we'll see going forward. Safety group, that might be the best group in the league right now when you're talking about Taylor Rapp, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde. And so this defense is going to be strong. I think the offensive unit grades are a little bit lower than what I personally would put them at. The running back room, I understand. If James Cook is your starter, there's a lot to be. We have to wait. We have to see what he eventually will be. But when I see a running back room with James Cook, potentially Latavius Murray, Damian Harrison, Nyheim Hines, I see better talent than a 1.5 score. And the receiver room is interesting to me as well, because Stephon Diggs is elite. I think just having a player like that should elevate you to a higher score than a 1.6. I know this is looking down on Gabe Davis overall, but I do think he's going to have a solid year, especially with some of the recent offensive additions that they had this offseason, with Dalton Kincaid helping out in the slot, adding speed and Hardy, Khalil Shakir, another year of experience, hopefully ready to step up in that slot role. And then tight end, 1.5. I don't really understand that, Kevin. Dawson Knox, I feel like, is one of, I don't want to say he's elite, but he's an above average tight end, and you just added a first round caliber tight end to that group. So that score to me doesn't make sense. And offensive line, I get it. The Bills' offensive line was not good last year, but there is the potential for a big jump with some of their additions. You still have Dion, you have Mitch. At left guard, you're going to have a competition, which normally brings out the best in players between McGovern and Edwards. And then right guard, you now have Osiris Torrence battling Ryan Bates. So, like I said, I understand some of the skepticism. He's unbiased. We're a little bit biased because obviously we watch every Bills game and root for them to do well. But I do think the offensive scores are a little bit low, and that the defensive scores are right around where I would have them at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting, obviously, how high some of the units are unbiasedly defensively. I mean, all of them, even at linebacker, are pretty off the charts, top units in most of those categories. And, how low some of the offensive ones are for as well as I thought the offense is doing. So that's funny. Let's talk about defensive end for a minute here, as it's something I wanted to get into. Obviously, you have the players we all know on the roster, pretty straightforward there. You're talking about Greg Rousseau. You're talking about Von Miller. We'll see where he goes, what week he plays in. Shaq Lawson, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, Kingsley Jonathan. That's easy enough, the people on the roster. I do think there's an addition there to be made. You got Leonard Floyd, Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, Frank Clark, Marcus Golden, Justin Houston, Melvin Ingram, Yannick Ngakoue, Carlos Dunlap. There's definitely names there. It's fairly deep for May at the edge position. You only expect two of those names to be floating around, like at most position group. There's like one or two of those names. But that one specifically is fairly loaded. They are all waiting probably for the May deadline, maybe into training camp. I think it still behooves the team to bring them in now into OTAs, get used to their new defense, especially defensively. I think it's not a quarterback, running back where you want to come in, miss spring. It's definitely something where it behooves you to be brought in in OTAs. So I think a defensive end is still added to the unit and to kind of set it up over the top defensively, because look, Mike Clay has the Bills as the second best defense before Poona Ford in a defensive end. Those could be the two additions that put the Bills toward number one defense in the league. So it's not a crazy thing that the defense is going to be very good again. So as we can see, we'll bring up the defense again. Only looks like Miami he has is the best ranked defense in the league, which is pretty interesting, and not by much. So certainly wasn't the case last year. I don't know if that's a Vic Fangio boost or what that is, but the number one ranked Miami Dolphins defense is certainly an interesting proposition to be number two in the league, number one ranked defensively. But remember, they utilized their draft picks early too. I think that sheet might be pre-draft, Mike, on the overall rankings. I'm not sure that those are post-draft to consider Kincaid, the overalls. Now the one I had up before was definitely post-draft. The ones where the teams are listed there, I think that is pre-draft rankings.
Yeah, and it is the one wild thing, Kev, about all of this is that when you look at the Bills defense, and the one spot that stands out is middle linebacker still. And it's really the thing that is the most interesting thing heading into training camp, in my opinion, when discussing this team, because they had opportunities to fill that hole before they ended up selecting Dorian Williams. They could have gone Drew Sanders or Trenton Simpson in the second round. Simpson ends up falling all the way to the mid-80s. So you had a chance to trade up potentially if you truly thought Trenton Simpson could be a guy that could come in and make an impact right away. There was other players, linebackers, that also went in the middle, late stages of the second round, third round that the Bills could have made a move on, didn't have interest in. So to me, the only takeaway I can have is that Brandon Beane is not as concerned about that position as the rest of us, as the media, the fans, and that he truly thinks it's a position where they can address it from within their room. Now, does that mean A.J. Klein could be starting this year? Could Dodson somehow win the spot? Or is it going to go to one of the younger guys like Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams? Does Spector have a chance? So I think the thing that is eye-opening on that is a lot of fans last year and going into the draft this year would say that Terrell Bernard was a wasted pick because he didn't get significant playing time last year. But the Bills see him every day in practice. They see what he's capable of. Do the Bills believe Terrell Bernard is ready to take that step up? It doesn't matter what we see on the outside or what we think on the outside. If McDermott thinks he can play middle linebacker or they're trying to change things up, it's not going to matter what our thought is. He'll play. So the A.J. Klein signing, in my opinion, was insurance in case things don't work out with whatever their main plan is right now. In Dorian Williams, to me, seems like a guy that has what they like in a middle linebacker, but they're not ready to put him in the middle of the competition because of the defense he played with in Tulane. And also, a lot of people would say his processing is a little bit slow at this moment in time to immediately take over on a defense like the Bills. So how it's all going to play out is interesting because that's really the only weakness I see at the moment on the Bills defense. And Brandon Beane had multiple opportunities, like I said, during the draft and free agency to address it. And he chose to stay away from it, which tells me he feels strongly about someone currently in the room. I'd wager it's probably Bernard, even though a lot of people are saying Bernard wouldn't make sense at middle linebacker.
Yeah. And a comment from Brandon Beane today, real chance Vaughn is ready for the season opener, and called him a genetic freak. So he did not go on the record about Tre'Davious White last year. No one did. So I think that there's a real opportunity, and at the very worst, it's a couple of games into the season. So that's definitely an interesting note. He made it back well within range last time he tore the same knee. So that's still a pretty cool update from somebody who seems to rehab really well off of these injuries. He's used to it. He's used to what it takes. This isn't his first time. He's not down mentally. He's already ahead of schedule. So at some point, maybe he just does rehab better than maybe I would or you would, Mike. So, if he's ready to go, just kind of eased in. It's kind of the ease in plan I thought they might go with Trey White last year. But he seemed to have a hard time with his rehab. Probably takes him into this year to really be back to full strength. So very interesting that the GM comments on that in May. So that's usually a pretty good sign outside of a setback that, he's going to miss limited action, kind of like what he said earlier. But with Vaughn, you got to take everything he says with a grain of salt. But when the GM comments publicly, I think that's a good sign.
The question is, even if he is fully ready to come back, do you ease him in? Do you let him – at what point do you let him go full throttle? Because I could make the argument that as long as the Bills are competitive, they're winning games, and they're safely a playoff team. Obviously, if they're losing games in September, everything changes. But if you think they're safely a playoff team, I could make an argument that maybe you should ease him in a little bit more, reduce his playing time to try to make sure that you have a healthy Von Miller for later in the season and the playoff run. I know injuries sometimes are just freak luck, an unfortunate circumstance, but we don't really need Von Miller going off in September and October. We need a healthy Von Miller for December, January, February, potentially. So I do hope, and I know that the Bills, doctors, management, everybody will be taking the cautious approach, but I do hope they take their time and do what's best for Von instead of trying to get him onto the field early.
I agree. I think they should do right, but they still a fine line. If he's ready to go, the GM's already prepping for him to play. I think at worst, you ease him in. You don't inactivate him to risk it and to risk something. It's going to be the Bills have one of the hardest strengths of schedules in the league. As of this point, things change, but the schedule does look tough, both by statistics and on paper. We'll see how it all turns out. The division's hard. I don't think you're going to get primetime games early on in the year. I'm fine with an ease, and I'm not fine with just scratching him to.
Yeah, no, that's how I am too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can be cautious with anyone. I mean, you could be cautious with anybody on the roster. A team that I think that errs like that, like the New York Yankees, will put you on the IR if you have a tiny little hip strain. When it comes to football, and I think you just got to play. Like you just got to get out there. If you're cleared mentally, you're cleared physically. You get out there and play. I'm fine with limiting some first quarter snaps. That's totally cool by me. I'm fine with the third downs in first quarter, but in the fourth quarter, I'd still like to see you have a gamut of your reps as you're in there to close out the game. And, you're giving, imagine Von Miller coming in the fourth quarter to give Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa a spell. That's quite still a nice problem to have, even if you're not going to register 55% of the snap. So it's going to be, I just thought it was an interesting note for the GM to comment. It's a pretty good step in the right direction that they're expecting to have him very early on in the season, if not by opening day. So that is something we didn't hear from other ACLs. You kind of hear, well, he's on schedule, or I hope he rehabs well, this and that. You don't generally hear, any more than that. So I'm really excited for the middle linebacker room, Mike. I'm really excited for it. I'm more excited than most. We talked to Eric Turner about Dorian Williams previous to the draft. We had a spaces and we were chatting about it. And he mentioned the likelihood that he could develop into a really good middle linebacker, had the wingspan, had the read and react, had everything there. He was kind of caught off guard by the outside linebacker comments, but I still think we kind of talked about that earlier, that was more of a protection by Beane. And he's like, well, maybe I'll backtrack a little bit on it. I went a little bit too far.
Do you think that's what started the firestorm on social media?
Yeah, of course.
Because
if he came out, Mike, how about this? If he came out to you and said he's day one starting middle linebacker, how would you feel about the pick?
Would have been perfectly okay.
Exactly.
So I tend to agree with you. I do think this was Beane kind of lowering the expectations of a fan base that was assuming the Bills were going to draft their starting middle linebacker on Thursday, Friday of last week, and basically telling them, let's be patient with this guy. We don't want to flood him with expectations, and that's why I believe he said outside linebacker and special teams, which then I think did the opposite of what Beane was hoping for, and I think that's why they ended up backtracking the next 2 days. I think Beane said that because he was looking at, we're going to ease him in. He has all the physical talent, all the physical attributes you're looking for, but we're trying to teach him the game, acclimate him to NFL football. Instead, with his comments, he basically scared the entire fan base that they did the same thing they did last year with Terrell Bernard, which was a pick and stash, a guy that they like, that they knew really wasn't going to see the field much, but they had intangibles of a linebacker that they liked. So we'll see how this all plays out. I am excited. I do think Dorian Williams' future with the Bills will be at middle linebacker at some point in time. Not willing to go out on a limb and say it'll be right away, but he will be part of this competition, assuming that he's able to show the coaches that he is capable of minicamp and gets off to a strong start in training camp.
Producer AJ Sobalski says he expects him to start week 10. So from AJ, he expects him to start week 10. I don't think that's far off. I think I saw a good comment in the chat room earlier that AJ Klein is the floor. I kind of like that. I kind of like that way of thinking that it's true. If Bernard can't hack it and he's truly a backup to Milano, Dorian Williams comes in and isn't it. I do believe that that's true. It would be a Klein-Dodson battle. You tell them both that they have an opportunity. I really think you don't need it. They're kind of redundant on the roster, but maybe they keep them both for special teams play. I don't really think you need them, especially with Balen Spector. They're a younger linebacker who can play teams, and maybe you have something in there. But I don't hate, like, you need to have one battle to me. I don't hate potentially six players battling at the middle linebacker. It's probably like 2 or 3, maybe not though. Like, I really like that it's a heavy competition. You don't have someone thinking that they have the job, and you're going to get the best out of each. I like to see what Dorian Williams can do. Like at Tulane, yeah, he wasn't the number 1 watched player, but there's a lot to like about that wingspan and the ability to close and make tackles. And if his vision can get a little bit better and his ability to diagnose can get a little bit better, he could be a really crazy good middle linebacker. Maybe he never develops, but that's why you take him at 91. Maybe he does, and it's a really good pick. But I trust Beane in this range to make the right selections, even with Terrell Bernard. Beane, if anywhere, has kind of struggled in the second round, believe it or not, that range where players are falling. He's got him ranked high. They fell for a reason, like AJ Epinesa was talked about maybe going in the first. Cody Ford, he tried to come up and hot people for. So there's kind of that second round that he's Boogie Basham. We're not really sure what the fit is there. He struggled a little bit there, if anywhere, in the draft. He's usually pretty good in the first. He's hit some players from 3 to 7. I liked what he did with Dawson Knox. Even Singletary was a very useful player. Spencer Brown could be a useful player, even though he had the back injury. We'll see what Williams and Bernard are. I think he's okay in that range, especially picking late in the third. He's knocked some 4th and 5th round picks out of the park. So, gotten some 6th round talent in the door. So ultimately, he does pretty good on day 3. He really does. Historically, he does well.
People like to grill him. Beane is, I think the narrative with Beane, with a lot of Bills fans, is that he had Josh Allen and that the rest of it is just Josh Allen carrying the team, which is not true. It's not true. Beane took apart the team when he took over in 2017 and built this from nothing. So I think the hindsight narrative that Josh Allen is the only reason why this team is as talented as it is right now is a bunch of hogwash. And like you said, Kevin, there have been late round hits. There have been day 1 hits, multiple day 1 hits. It's not even that he hasn't had players in the 2nd and 3rd round that have produced and have played for the Bills. It's that he doesn't have guys in the 2nd and 3rd round that have developed into grade A players. They've mostly been depth, backups, decent contributors, but nothing special. So that always leaves fans wanting for more, because your first round picks are going to come in and start right away for the most part. The day 2 picks, where you're getting guys in the 2nd, 3rd round, a lot of fans are hoping those guys are going to be starters and make an impact early. When the truth of it is, when you are a Super Bowl roster, a lot of times day 2 picks are going to have to fight to earn their time. Now, I understand Kansas City won the Super Bowl last year and they played a bunch of rookies, but they were also in a situation where Kansas City needed to play those rookies because they didn't have guys in front of them. And they were also confronted dealing with injuries early, where those guys had to step up. Now, we'll see if that happens, if the Bills have more faith in some of their guys in the future in similar situations. But the narrative that Beane cannot draft, I think, is one that leaves. It's not my favorite. I'll put it bluntly.
Yeah, I think it's a weird one. He's absolutely dominant in vet free agents, to get vet free agents to come here, to get good values on them, playing the cap. He's dominant in those situations. So to me, yes, like I said, I pointed out, like, if there's a flaw, it's in the second round. That's the only thing that worries me a little bit about just offhand about Osiris Torrence is, like, if he's a stud right guard, why did he fall between 3 guards and 2 centers? He's the 6th interior offensive lineman taken. That gives me just like a quick glance at pause is like, well, to me, he might have been the number 1 interior lineman. Is there some questions with how big he is, that he can't move, that he can't, pull? What's the issue? Because to me, it just looks like a solid day 1 right guard that, should be a 5 to 10 year starter. So that to me is what, like, the only pause was, why did that guy go where he went? And I felt that way before at times, which sometimes makes me think, like, step back and take a think about that. Like, really, why would someone else not select him other than, or number 2 would be the round 2 is actually a lot better than people are giving credit for. Yes, we all dogged the first round talent, most notably the top 20, but after 20, and we all saw this, there is good football players in this draft. The first 20, it was not a normal top 20, but Beane even said it. From 20 to 80, there were some talented football players on the being able to be selected in day 2. Like, it was a really good day 2 draft.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's a little bit of a difference between media perception, fan perception of a player, and what NFL teams are thinking of that same player. So media and fans obviously are high on Osiris Torrence, and I think the Bills are equally high on him, but there was probably something that led to him dropping a little bit, at least to 59. It wasn't like it was a massive drop, but you think about it. During the draft process, we have fans and people clamoring for guys like Josh Downs at 27 if all the receivers are gone. And then Josh Downs falls all the way to, 76? You have people talking about Trenton Simpson as a possible first-round pick for the Bills 2 weeks before the draft, and he ends up going 87. So there's always some guys that maybe there's information that didn't get out yet. Maybe there's something on film that teams are seeing that the rest of us are not noticing. But all you can really do as a fan is trust what your eyes are telling you and hope that your team is making the right picks. Osiris Torrence was a beast in college, Kev. He doesn't have the traditional high RAS score that a lot of these previous Bills picks on the O-line have had. Guys that you would typically think would be Aaron Cromer type guys that you can mold, develop into something. But this guy is just a big body who got it done at Florida at an SEC level, transferring from Louisiana with his coach. And when you think about it, to not allow a sack in your college career, especially when you're playing SEC football as a senior, that is incredible. And it really beefs up this Bills offensive line. I think it's clear now after this draft, after free agency, that when Brandon Beane was looking at his offensive line at the end of the season, it wasn't the outside. It wasn't the tackles he was concerned about, even though we all agree.
You're right about that, though, on the show.
It was right about interior. Interior. When you sign 2 former starting guards and then you draft someone at 59 overall, he believes the issues on the offensive line came from the inside out, not including Mitch Morse, though, and that by fixing that, Josh is going to be able to have the time in the pocket that he needs to hopefully take this team to the next level.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, he played 3 years at Louisiana Lafayette. He was all Sun Belt there. Started the majority of the games, started 12 games as a junior at right guard. Started 13 of the 14 games as a true freshman. As a sophomore, he started all 11 games and was named second team all Sun Belt. He was the 4th best offensive guard in the nation by PFF. Then he entered the transfer portal and ultimately only played 1 year at Florida. I'm assuming that had played a role into it. And consensus All-American last year, first team All-SEC. So definitely comes with some good pedigree. Maybe only 1 year of Florida Gators football was the reason. But how much do we like Florida right now? Look at it. 2 top picks.
It's a weird program to fall in love with, especially
Shorter.
Not really doing great the last couple of years.
Their other guard they brought in as a UDFA. They like Florida a little bit.
The big question you have right now is most people, including myself, and I'm assuming you, are pretty much slotting Osiris Torrence in as the starting right guard at this moment. What does this mean for Ryan Bates? Is he trade ammo during the preseason, or is he going to be your versatile backup lineman that can slot into any position that there's really a need at? If Mitch Morse goes down, Bates could go to center. If Torrence is down, he slots in at right guard. Has that mobility. What do you think this does for Bates? Because obviously he doesn't want to be a backup. He didn't sign to come back to have a backup role. He came back to Buffalo, obviously with that restricted free agent status, to try to be a starter in the NFL. Yeah. So he can't be super happy about the way the draft played out.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this is I think the Bills are going to play it by ear, where it's early bait. You had teams that liked him. They gave him offers. A lot of NFC teams came after him. I think the NFC North specifically had a couple teams interested in him, including the Bears. At some point, I think he's bait. If he comes in and he's still pretty good, but you have Broker who's able to take a position from him in camp. You have Tommy Doyle back playing tight end, swing, all types of different things. He's able to take a role. Ike Butker, who they like a lot. It's not inconceivable to admit that Beane likes to get his draft picks that way and could be on the block, as he's done it many, many, many times. Could he see a fifth, a fourth, try to push the Cody Ford envelope even a little bit higher to someone that's produced a little bit at this level? Could be a fourth round pick. You don't know what's going to happen. By all signs are pointing to right guard Osiris Torrence, left guard McGovern, right tackle, left tackle are pretty entrenched as well. Mitch Morse is the center. So unless you have a plan to get rid of Morse or do something with Morse, yes, it's great to have a $4+ million backup interior offensive lineman. That's salary cap the Bills could use to free up during the season. Maybe do something there if needed, but more importantly, they have a draft pick that could come back for them. Or if he's proving to be really versatile and they can't let him go, and Nick Broker, hasn't developed, you can't trust Nick Broker, like Butker isn't taking over or anything. Yeah, I think that there's a notion. You have David Edwards as well, someone that has done it before, that Beane makes sure to always reference as someone who's done it on a Super Bowl team. I think that you can move away from Ryan Bates, especially if you can have a backup center, especially at that value, especially if you're going to get a pick. But if not, and he comes in to prove that versatile, you hold him and maybe you move somebody else. But the Nick Broker pick is kind of the setting point to me between Edwards, Doyle, Broker, Butker.
What do you think about those? And I'm seeing it in the comments right now, saying that Bates could take over for Morse at center if Morse ever gets to that point where he wants to move on. Everybody always alludes to the fact that Morse could be one concussion away from wanting to retire, hang it up. I think some of that might be speculation. Obviously, Morse has talked about his concussion issues, and you never know in the NFL. You could be done just like that. Do you think they would hold on to him simply as an option in case something like that ever happened, a health-related situation with Mitch Morse?
Yeah, if the Bills felt like he was that, he's an expensive insurance, more than a backup quarterback. He's an expensive insurance policy for sure. So if he's really is the heir apparent and that's who they don't address it next year, say something happened to Morse, you can still address center next year and still have everything else rock solid, the other four rock solid across the room. That line has some longevity on it. You have Osiris Torrence on a rookie deal. You have Connor McGovern just signed up. You have Dawkins on his deal. You have a few more years of Spencer Brown and a couple other players that are still locked up, Broker on a rookie deal. At some point that's not defensive tackle. You can go ahead and make a move. If Morse does retire, you can worry about center next year, but it's an expensive insurance policy for sure. And maybe one that they'll like to keep and take out on the long term, but ultimately he could be one that has value though. Like can you trade David Edwards today? No. Can you trade Nick Broker today? No, not really. Can you trade, most other Butker, others on the line? Not really. I think that Ryan Bates has a legitimate value return on him. If Cody Ford's going to get a 5, you get a 4 or better for Ryan Bates. And, he signed pretty reasonable for a team, $4 million plus to start. It's not terrible. Bills get some salary cap relief, get a pick, and can go elsewhere. I don't think it's outlandish because you got to kind of weigh like value to skill. You can't just trade the 10th offensive lineman on your team. You do need to trade someone 6 to 8 that might have a little bit more value than moving like Butker. So that's kind of my opinion on the room. But if they determine he is the heir apparent, he does offer really great versatility, is the 6th offensive lineman in the game. You keep him. You take out that insurance policy for the rest of the deal and you roll with it. But it's an interesting topic that they went both. And Beane said he didn't want to, but they went both Osiris Torrence, who was the top player on their board in the 2nd, and Nick Broker, who was by far the top player on their board in the 7th. And being able to utilize those rookie deals, trading Bates, it is an intriguing picture if you need to free up money. If another veteran comes up, whether it's D-end or whether it's, receiver comes out of, Jerry Jeudy's traded or DeAndre Hopkins and the Bills want to go back to that well at some point, they're being more reasonable. Well, you got Bates, you got a couple other things you can do to quickly, make that happen. So I don't think it's outlandish, Mike.
No, I don't either. And it's one of those where you just let it play out however it plays out. I think you can go plenty of different directions with it and be okay with different results, however you want to proceed with that. The only curious thing I really have with the offensive line is really the right tackle situation. Because with how heavy Brandon Beane went with addressing the interior line, I do find it curious that he didn't find really any competition for Spencer Brown, at least legitimate competition at a starting job. I would have thought in this draft, because I realistically, I went into the offseason thinking Spencer Brown was going to keep his job, that Brandon Beane would justify him starting by saying, you know what, he entered last year at camp, wasn't healthy, didn't get off to a good start, was shaky, but didn't have his health. He's a second-year player, high-res player. We still think we can develop him, not ready to give up on him. Well, that point ended up being correct. The Bills definitely are going into next season with Spencer Brown, and they still believe in him. But I would have thought they would have given themselves an insurance policy of someone that could push Spencer Brown a little bit. I know that they brought back Quesenberry, that Tommy Doyle's still in the fold. But I'm surprised everything was targeted at guard during this offseason. Everything was. And I understand you want to improve your depth. You want to improve your starters at both left and right side. But you think about it. They brought in McGovern. You think, okay, this is our starting left guard. We'll have some average backup. Well, then you bring in David Edwards, who not only was not a backup, he's been a starter for multiple years. Right guard, you think Ryan Bates is most likely safe after the Kincaid pick in the first round. And then out of nowhere, you have Osiris Torrence, who's probably going to take his job. So even if we're assuming that McGovern and Osiris Torrence are the starters at the guard spots, it's interesting that both spots, theoretically, there will be a competition. And if either of them struggle, you have someone else that can slot in ahead of them. But right tackle, there's no such person that I could see taking over for Spencer Brown. I know Quesenberry is a veteran, that he is a decent run blocker in the past, but it's just curious to me. Basically, they're just saying, Spencer Brown, this is your job. You're not having competition. Now, is that something where they don't want him to feel lack of confidence, or they don't want him to feel under pressure? I don't know. But that just really stands out to me. And maybe there is still a move that they can make before the regular season. But I don't really see anyone that can compete with Spencer Brown right now for that right spot.
Yeah. And what could Ike Butker get? You could probably get a 6th or 7th, depending on how good he looks this offseason. He has shown some versatility, but ultimately, I don't think enough to really move the needle, maybe. But someone like that would probably receive a future 6, a future 7. I'm not sure exactly how much fruit that bears. So I do think you got to kind of consider more of the middle tier of that offensive line unit, a really depth and a decent unit. I think you're playing on the fact that if Broker comes in and looks good, you have him on a 7th round deal for 4 years. That's what you're looking for. The difference is Bates is signed and can be a starting guard, and with versatility equals a pick. A 1-year deal for Butker, 7th round pick. Broker is the reason that this could work out, because if he comes in and looks good and can play versatility, kind of be almost a Bates, 4 years of that is very valuable. And that's kind of what I'm looking at here. It's funny to say Osiris Torrence probably takes the starting job, but Bates' real competition is how does Doyle look coming back? He's versatile. How does Broker look coming in? He's versatile. That could be kind of the sentence to Bates, not necessarily just Osiris Torrence. It's kind of a piece of the package where I think that they will utilize a different path to see his roster spot. And for me, Quesenberry's the backup right tackle, so that's already settled. But in fact, I think that Brian Bates is a likely trade candidate because he has some value, and that's what makes the best trade candidates, in my opinion. A couple of the other guys, Doyle, Butker, a couple of them are coming off of injuries. They just don't make great trade. You're not going to trade Broker. So it's really Bates if you're going to consider someone to be traded. And then maybe defensive tackle still with all guys on 1-year deals. Some of those guys could stick out to me as potential trade bait, bringing back in at Oliver. Linebacker, funny enough, has some players that others could like that could have some linebackers get traded. That could look around the league. It is a fairly traded position. You can come in and play it. As much as we don't think the linebacking room is good, others might give a pick for the linebacker room, especially with the 7 there. So it's an interesting unit to follow between linebacker. And then the Bills at corner. Maybe they really like what they have there, and Dane Jackson's a trade candidate. I don't think that that's far-fetched either. The fact that, you brought in a guy like Alex Austin who had some high values and test particularly well. If he comes in and looks good too, between him and Benford, you can definitely move.
Dane would make sense. If there was a guy in defense that could be trade bait, it would be Dane Jackson for exactly the reasons you just mentioned.
Yeah. I think he's another guy to watch out for getting traded. But hey, we've talked about all year how maligned the O-line was. Why trade from it? The only reason would be you'd get a usable pick and save some money. So those would be the reasons. You wouldn't trade a cheap contract at the O-line position. You just wouldn't. If Broker looks good, you're not going to trade him. So that's kind of my opinion on what to do. You're not going to trade a rookie contract unless it's Cody Ford. I think that you have good offensive linemen for a reason, and they struggled there at times last year. Let's not get into a predicament where, you're thinking about running in Quentin Morris in certain sets because you got so injured in Miami. So I think that that's kind of what you're evaluating as you kind of get into spring and into summer. But I kind of wanted to talk about defensive end just for one more second, Mike. Do you think that a defensive end move gets made, and do you think it's needed? Do you think one final push to have a veteran, and which one would you like?
So I do think it would be helpful if the Bills can bring someone in, veteran experience, and get them in under the cap. I would love this. I don't know how realistic it is, but I would love a push for Yannick Ngakoue. He would be a guy I'd be in favor of. There's Melvin Ingram. He also makes some sense, and I know a lot of people have been mentioning Justin Houston. You look at the list of veteran DNs available right now, and it is a crazy list for early May. And because of the amount of guys that are available, you would think that you might be able to get one of these guys on a pretty good contract for the Bills overall. So I do think it's important. You don't know. I know there's positive news about Von potentially being back for the beginning of the season, but we don't know how that's going to play out at this point. It's early May. I don't want to make assumptions that he's going to be the same Von that we've come to expect in mid-September. So I would like some veteran insurance, someone that you could hopefully plug in across from Greg Rousseau. If not, you got some more depth for when Von does come back. Just another guy to add to the rotation so you can continue to attack teams in waves. If anything, now football isn't about just finding one stud that you play 80% of the snaps. It's about continuously throwing guys out there that can go full out and attack opposing O-lines with your rotations. And so I'm all for it, Kev. I probably wasn't as for it a couple months ago before thinking about it and seeing how things were playing out. But with the market the way it is right now, I do think it's a move that makes sense and something that the Bills should be open to.
Yeah. Tommy says sign Yannick. He'd be a good sign if you go that route. Yeah, I mean, he'd be someone that would require a little bit more money and void years probably. But the good thing about, I talk about void years all the time, is it's a placeholder on the cap. It's almost like a team option that a team can take out because you're already accounting for that player and you can kind of exercise that cap against you and pay him a little bit more to stay. So you can kind of use it as a team option and say, hey, Yannick, if you play good, we already have you on the cap next year as with your void years. Let's look at this and let's include that into a deal. So I think that something like that could happen. And the Bills have gone young at most positions. I mean, Shaq Lawson still isn't the oldest player in the world. Poona Ford is a younger player. David Edwards, Taylor Rapp. They've gone young, traditionally for some of the older players. Damian Harris. He did bring in just recently Latavius Murray, as we talked about. But for the most part, they've gone fairly young this year across the team and adding young talent and not just the oldest veteran they can find. So that's kind of an interesting thing that they've kind of transitioned to, that, Yannick Ngakwe's got that going for him over the 34-year-old, Justin Houston, who's still very effective, or Melvin Ingram, also 34. So at some point, like, they might be looking for young talent right now on the roster, as it's pretty evident by the names we just had. A 28-year-old matches up perfectly with what the Bills will be looking to do. I think that it's a good addition at this stage. He could come in and be the pass complement to others who are good against the run. But, a Yannick Ngakoue could really come in and come after it. So that's really what I'm looking forward to. And I do believe they added the defensive end room by mandatory OTAs.
Yeah, I'm with you, Kevin, and all of that makes sense. And one thing I do want to point out, Kevin, now that the draft is over, we've gone through free agency. Obviously, there could still be some small moves between now and training camp and so forth. I do think it's really impressive what Brandon Beane has done this offseason at attacking free agency, the draft, and kind of filling some of the holes on this team despite the limited resources that the Bills have had. If you would have told me, I know offensive line was important, I know defensive line, edge, all of those were important. If you would have told me that the O-line would have picked up 2 starting guards, that we would pick up Damian Harris, Latavius Murray, that you would add a pass-catching weapon like Dalton Kincaid, a speed guy like Hardy, a special teams depth receiver like Sherfield, and then a draft pick in the 5th round that adds height, vertical ability in Justin Shorter. And then you look at some of the defensive moves to bring back Jordan Poyer. No one saw that coming heading into the offseason. Taylor Rapp coming on a $1.7 million contract. Poona Ford coming to Buffalo on, we'll see the terms of that, but probably not a massive deal considering it's only 1 year and he took less money here than what other places were offering. But you bring back Jordan Phillips, you bring back Shaq Lawson. You look at his ability to make these contracts work, bring in the talent, and then retain some of the talent. And really the major loss that you have is Tremaine Edmonds. I think it's very impressive what he did, and it really speaks to the culture and respect level for the Buffalo Bills organization across the NFL. Because even though Poyer wanted his money, when it wasn't there, he was still open to returning because he felt comfortable enough with what he started here and the guys in the locker room, and he wants to finish off his mission. A guy like Taylor Rapp was a starting safety. To come here on a cheap deal, Poona Ford, starting D tackle, like, to me, it's pretty incredible that he's been able to attack these holes the way they have in a team that some people thought might be exiting a Super Bowl window, even though I hate phrasing it like that, because I think as long as you have Josh Allen, you are in a Super Bowl window. The fact that some people thought it might be starting to go on a downward trajectory, I think it's clear now. The Bills are still all in, and they still believe that they are closer to being one of the best teams in the league than they are a team struggling to win their division. We'll see how it plays out. The AFC East is much more difficult this year with Aaron Rodgers in the division and Tua back healthy. But I just had to say how impressed I was with
it was a great offseason for starting negative $20 million. They obviously made space quickly, but started negative $20 million, had a great draft. And kind of to cap my point off from before, Connor McGovern, another signing that they had, a guy that they trusted in, 25 years old. Tim Settle restructured, 25 years old. Most people think Tim Settle's old. He's not. Poona Ford just signed today, 27 years old. They got younger across the board. David Edwards, a guy we brought up, 26 years old, Super Bowl champion. Taylor Rapp, 25 years old. They got a lot, even the re-signings of Shaq Lawson, 28 years old. They didn't spend Deontay Hardy. They gave a 2-year deal to 25 years old. Trent Sherfield, 27 years old. So they got younger. They took guys right off of their first contracts. They thought that was the way to go this time around during this reboot between, obviously their draft class, but to get younger here was a pretty strong indication of what the Bills were looking to do here. Dane Jackson off of his first contract re-signed. Ike Butker still, 28. So these guys aren't, 28 or younger. I mean, that's what they were going for. They brought back Dodson, who's 24. Someone that we might think has been around a long time. He really hasn't, 24 years old. So really good youth across the board at these position groups. And they did get, a fair amount younger here. And it wasn't just all about, they trade for Naeem Hines is another one I forgot, 26 years old. So they didn't just decide let's get a veteran in here 1 year. They got guys on multiple years for once. They got guys that were fairly on the younger end as discussed. And, I think that it's a little bit different of a change for what they've been doing in the years past. Damian Harris, 26 years old. So you can kind of see that the age is something that they were after this time around and not just the veteran present. So they had a little philosophy changed, got it done. And that's why Yannick Ngakoue to me kind of fits in exactly what they've done. If you look at the kind of the archetype of the offseason, Yannick Ngakoue, that 28-year-old or younger threshold, it kind of fits the mold outside of, really bringing in Phillips, who's 30, and bringing in Latavius Murray just as depth. Other than that, they've gone fairly young at most position depth, which is a really interesting perspective that maybe Taylor Rapp gets the contract next year. Maybe Poona Ford gets the contract next year. Maybe Yannick Ngakoue would get
That's a good way of thinking, Kev. These are 1-year deals because that's all they could fit in at this moment.
Correct.
But you earn the chance to get that big deal next year, the chance to take over a more permanent role, get your bag of cash. And the way I like to look at it is you go through the entire roster, you look at each positional group. What position group got worse this offseason and which position groups stayed the same or got better? The only position on this entire team that I can look at right now and say they have downgraded is middle linebacker. You go from Tremaine Edmonds, who's a stud, to a question mark. But you look in every other room, it's incredible. We already know about the offensive line, so I'm not going to bring that back. But the running back room, yes, Devin Singletary was a good player, but we would all agree that the Bills were a little bit limited with what they could bring at teams from a running back perspective. Now you have a one-cut guy in Damian Harris. You potentially have Latavius Murray as competition for one of the final spots, a guy that's bigger, that is rushed for over, I think, 500 yards, 600 yards the last 5-6 years. You have Naeem Hines as some depth, special teams ability. You look at the wide receiver room right now. We all thought that was a decent room heading into last year with Isaiah McKenzie and Jamison Crowder. It turned out to be an incredible weakness of this team. It was the biggest disappointment, I would say, go after last year was the lack of development from the receiver room. Well, you still have Diggs and Davis, but now we have Khalil Shakir, who's going to be another year more experienced, but you bring in the speed element with Hardy. I think that's gonna help out. And even though I know Kincaid is a tight end, I'm thinking about how he will impact this passing game. And it's going to be a huge improvement to have Josh finally have a weapon once again to use the middle of the field. So you go position by position by position. They've almost all gotten better. And that is a good sign going forward, because for those that thought, well, maybe they'll dip from 13-3 to 11-6 or 10-7. I don't think it's going to be as significant of a drop as some people might have thought back in January.
They got younger, and that's really important. I think they had a little bit of a philosophy change across the board, and I'd love to cap off the money that maybe they were thinking about giving to DeAndre Hopkins on Poona Ford and Yannick Ngakoue. That'd be quite a good consolation prize to add to the D-line over, what happens to be inside of the receiver room. So to me, yes, I was all in on receiver. They dressed it in their own way. They got him a weapon. They protected him, got in shorter into the situation. But ultimately, I think that there's adding two premier talents to the defensive line is a difference maker. Good point by Les. Prayers up for Kim. Absolutely. Continued on that front always when it comes to that. And thank you for the Pagulas in general for giving Brandon Beane the flexibility. We've heard it already. The Bengals are running into trouble from what I've heard in terms of when you guarantee money, you need to escrow money away. That's how the salary cap works. Yes, it's fun money. However, when you guarantee money, you need to guarantee it. It needs to be there. It doesn't get taken yet. But as the guarantees are paid out, you need to have money in escrow. As you do restructures, as you do upfront bonuses, you need to have liquid cash, not just salary cap. And an owner that allow you to do so is a big benefit to owners that do cash to cap, which is the opposite. It's how much cash are we allocating? And we're going to use that as our cap space internally. So ultimately, the Pagulas have given Beane everything that he needs to do to be successful. And straight up, if he came to him right now and said, we can make Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Hopkins, Yannick Ngakoue work, they'll let it happen. Like they'll let it happen. So that's ultimately what is really cool about what this regime is able to do. And going forward, Mike, I needed to spend 2 minutes. I actually lowered it here. I said 9 minutes, but I lowered it to 2, talking about undrafted free agents just for you. But we have to have a slight segment on undrafted free agents because I love him. Mike likes just wait and see what happens. But Jalen Wayne, a guy that, has a great bloodline, who was 5th and 6th round in most experts boards, right was shorter and for the most part across the board as someone that could have gotten drafted, played really well. Sunbelt, one of their players of the year at South Alabama. He's a really quality player that I want to watch what Jalen Wayne could do from those bloodlines. 23 years old. So someone that I definitely have that I'm watching. DJ Dale, a guy that I had sneakily making the roster, a really sneaky piece of that Alabama defense who's done it all. But Poona Ford may have taken his goal away. Do expect both of those guys to be on the practice squad. So I wanted to bring up both of them as premier players I'm watching on the UDFA front. No one else I'm going to really notice at this stage. Jordan Mims was interesting as well, as a guy who did it all for Fresno State, scored 18 touchdowns last year. A guy that's produced, really, quite frankly, could have been drafted. But I wanted to make sure that he's somebody that I brought up. But Latavius Murray and Poona Ford quickly changed the narrative on some of those guys, leaving just Wayne as a guy I'm watching in the undrafted free agency front. And I love that for Mike. I love that the Bills are basically like, we're only signing 5 to 6 now. We don't need to give them money. These undrafted free agents are getting a ton of money right now. Andre Carter from Army got a ton of money.
That contract was massive.
The Bills are like, we're not playing in that. That costs on the salary cap. We don't have the roster spots. I love that they're doing 5 to 6. And shout out to my guy James Patterson coming in for minicamp. A guy that could sneakily be a linebacker on this roster.
My thunder. That was the one thing I could have talked about.
Okay, go ahead. Talk about it, Mike.
Well, James Patterson getting the minicamp invite. Congrats to him. You always like to see UB players get a shot at trying to make the professional.
Bills have 2 of them.
rank. Yeah, I mean, you think about it. No one ever would have thought the Bills would have simultaneously had 2 UB corners on their roster last year, and that was the case at one point during the season. So congrats to James Patterson. He had a tremendous career with the UB Bulls. A lot of you might know that he's the brother of Washington Commanders running back Jarrett Patterson, who was a record-breaking running back at UB during their finest time, their top 25 season during COVID. And I do want to bring up one other UDFA, Kev. Actually, a couple.
There we go, Mike. That's what I like to hear.
Tyrell Shavers out of San Diego State.
Special teamer. Good
special teamer. Might have an outside chance of maybe trying to earn a role in that perspective that way. Some people are saying he's elite at what he does with that. And then the Florida tackle who played alongside of Osiris Torrence, Richard, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Pardon me, Guriyaj. ESPN had him as a top 20 UDFA following the draft. So that is a guy that maybe has an outside chance of obviously not making the team, but being a practice squad guy and something that they can spend some time to develop. So there are a few guys out there, Kev, that are interesting to me. I know that I'm not normally the biggest UDFA guy, but there are some players that the Bills brought in that at least warrant some practice squad consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard Garage is definitely someone that I have on the list too. I think that the unit's fairly deep. But he was, like you mentioned, someone that has been noted as, everyone kind of develops their own top UDFA list. I think Jalen Wayne's toward the top of it, in my opinion, if he wasn't on the list you saw. But I could see where Garage is definitely on a list. So he's definitely someone I'm watching here as well in training camp. There's not a lot of them. So that's the good thing for Mike. There's really only 6, and maybe we'll see if anybody comes out. Maybe comes out of minicamp as well. They will sign. They have last year. They've signed 1, 2, or 3 players from minicamp. So that's what I'm hoping for. And Donna, there are times and episodes where Mike gets all the run, but UDFAs, I even shrank UDFA topic down for you. Yep.
All the run, Kevin.
Yeah.
I like to think that we share the time pretty fairly and give each other the opportunity to speak. And she was just being sarcastic. It's okay. It's okay to have some talk going on in the chat.
Donna, always appreciate your you tuning in. But Mike, I mean, what an action-packed show. Like, and producer AJ Sobalski, he's on his, I think, 2 weeks left with as the producer here. So, we're counting down the days here of May, and we appreciate all the work that he's.
We're hoping we can keep him on, though. I mean,
yeah, we're trying to get AJ on a contract extension here, guys. So
the negotiations are getting a little tense at times, but if we can get another sponsor in addition to Sons of Erie to help us out, so we can pay AJ a little bit on the side to stay with us, we'd appreciate it. So reach out to your local establishments and tell them we need to keep AJ Sobalski with the Going Deep podcast.
Yeah, please tweet at the big boss. Get him moving to keep AJ Sobalski here, producing the Going Deep podcast and doing great work behind the scenes at the Combine. He's done a lot for us. He deserves that contract extension. So we'll see what we'll be able to work out before the deadline here in May.
Some would argue he's more valuable than me. So
yeah, I mean, producer Mike. I think it's time for producer Mike.
If you make me producer Mike, I'll be okay. I'll survive.
Yeah, producer Mike Butt. That might be something that we go with. But once again, we really appreciate everybody tuning in. We have a drop coming from Sons of Erie. They're dropping a great new design. Watch out for them. www.instagram.com/Sons of Erie. Got an all new design coming out. Also, the bocce tournament, the Elio DePaulo's bocce tournament, sponsored with Buffalo Bills players and Sons of Erie. That's going to be a great event. You can come and spectate, watch people play bocce as a guest pass. Going to be a great time for charity, all for the Elio DePaulo Scholarship Fund. So that's going to be a really cool time to participate in. So with all that being said, we really appreciate everybody coming here for an hour and 20 minutes for this action-packed review. We have Ant coming up here later at 9:00, so we got it all ready and primed for his show. But really enjoy talking UDFA, talking defensive line. We got into O-line for a while today. Really some great discussion around how that O-line is going to look. But excited to see how the next week turns out. Hopefully next week, Mike, will have a defensive end to talk about. We'll maybe have some more things that trickle on through the pipeline here with the Bills' final roster tweaks. Maybe some more mini camp invites and players that make the roster that we can talk about just for you, Mike. But that'll do it for us. From Kevin, that's Mike, producer AJ down there doing all the gritty work, and we'll be back at you next week, 7 p.m. on the Going Deep podcast, and we'll catch you guys all later.
Josh Allen looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw. And it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action.